Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, conservative, not bitter indeed. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I want to talk about one of these Supreme Court cases. You may know just from paying attention to the news, or just maybe you're a seasoned professional when it comes to following these things, but you'll find that at the end of June, early July, there are some, some Supreme Court cases that are released, are decided and released to the public. We had a couple of cases yesterday. One I want to speak about specifically here today, RNC, the Watson versus Republican National Committee Party case. Out of Mississippi. I want to talk about this because it has implications on the voting in this country, mail-in ballots, when those can be received. And that, I think, is critically important, especially when we're talking about the possibility of still trying to find a way to pass the Save America Act, which Trump hasn't given up on. The U.S. Senate has practically, for all practical purposes, decided to give up on it. But I want to talk about this because this matters. Election integrity matters. Confidence in our elections matter tremendously, my friends. And that's what I want to talk about today. I also want to get to, time permitting, I don't know if you've seen Audrey Pulvar. She is the deputy mayor of Paris, having some blame to cast at the United States. You, my friends, you, America here, she's blaming us for something that they are dealing with in Europe. Of course she is. This is what these folks do. And the people on the left here in this country love it. And the people with sense roll their eyes and say this is absurd. I'll get to that in due course, my friends, as well. Ever notice how some families seem to have a plan that lasts for generations? That, my friends, is not by accident. Full Suite Wealth works with people who want their wealth to make a difference for years to come. Their team brings together high-level investment strategies like private equity, private credit, and options strategies. All those things coupled with expert legal guidance. It's about making sure your vision becomes a reality for the people you love today and tomorrow. If you're looking to do more than just manage your money, if you want to leave a mark and build something lasting, take a look at Full Suite Wealth. FullSuiteWealth.com is the website. Again, check it out today, FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Okay, so let's start here. Let's lay a little bit of background. Here. In 2024, the RNC, the Mississippi Republican Party, the Libertarian Party of Mississippi, and individual voters sued Mississippi Secretary of State Michael Watson and county election officials, challenging a Mississippi law that counts absentee ballots as valid if they are received prior to election day. That's not true. Not prior to. If they are postmarked, I should say, by election day, and they are received up to 5 days after election day. So the plaintiffs in the case, those folks that I just mentioned, argued that the federal statutes that existed pertaining to election law established a single national election day, and that law, that established election day, preempts the state's 5-day receipt window for these ballots, since an election isn't legally concluded until officials actually receive the ballots. Now, so this goes through the court system, the lower courts, The district court sided with the state of Mississippi, ruling that the state law did not conflict with federal statutes. The Fifth Circuit Court, however, reversed that decision, saying that the federal laws on the books, preempted the Mississippi statute because ballots must be both cast and received by election day. By the way, this is common sense. By the way, listen, I'm not in the business here of being a Supreme Court analyst. I do talk about these things from time to time, my friends. But the truth is that we are dealing with something that is pretty basic, and I would say pretty that involves common sense. Common sense is that we do have an election day. Common sense is how it was when I was a kid, or even when I was a young adult. You know, we used to have election results on election day. Now we have election week. We've seen this with Los Angeles. It's amazing to me the number of people who act like this is no big deal. The number of people who think that this is just natural and acceptable. If you are going to vote by mail, you should understand, first of all, you've had your ballot for a long time. Secondly, you should know the rules on how this is done. And there is absolutely no reason that ballots should become trickling in days and in some cases weeks after Election Day. That makes no sense. I don't see how anyone with a 1 iota of fairness in their body can look at that and say that that is a good thing. You absolutely, my friends, you want the counting to stop on Election Day. You want the officials to be able to respond to the voting base, to the American people, the citizens of their states on Election Day, or maybe the early in the morning after, right? This is not a complicated thing. We are dealing with the concept of counting ballots, counting tally marks, and just votes cast for a particular candidate. This is not advanced math. This is something that kindergartners can do. There is no excuse for this. And when you have candidates who are leading when the results are turned in on election night, and then you begin to see a gradual change in the numbers, and then in the numbers from mail-in ballots, it causes questions. What happened? At least the question of what happened, right? Why are there ballots coming in that are different, proportionally different than those that were cast on Election Day? Well, Todd, that's because the Republicans like to vote in person and on Election Day, and people who are Democrat and maybe left-leaning, they like to send in their ballots at the very last minute, apparently. And that's the reason. That explains all of this. Well, forgive me if that does not do enough for me. Forgive me if I find that quite suspicious. You know, I remember back in 2000. Do you remember this? For those of you who are old enough, seasoned enough, I should say, like myself, you remember Al Gore and George W. Bush. You remember in the wake of the election in Florida, there were lawsuits, there were dimpled Chads, hanging Chads, there were videos of people holding up ballots to the light to see if that was an intended vote for, again, who was it for? These were votes for Al Gore, right? They were trying to find ways to count votes for Al Gore any way possible. And so you had two election workers there examining the ballots, and it was preposterous. This was the 2000 election, so 26 years ago, these shenanigans were taking place. There were lawsuits, there were counts and recounts on top of that. Gore never won a single recount, but yet there are Americans to this day who said George W. Bush stole the election from Al Gore in 2000. did not happen, but that's the way that it's argued, presented amongst those on the left today. So, well, in those days anyway. I can understand what some of the questions, especially when you're looking at people examining ballots. I can understand people saying, what's going on here? Why is my election being run like this? Why don't we have a better system? Right? And I think that the same can be said today. Now, some of these things aren't out in the open. We don't see these things like we did back in 2000. But I'll tell you this, I remember in 2000 listening to Rush Limbaugh talking about ballots being found in closets of school buildings and so forth, and trunks of cars. And you begin to ask yourself, how do these get there? What's going on? Is this listen, I try to be fair here. Is it a genuine misunderstanding and an oversight and a mistake, or is there something much more nefarious going on here? You don't have to be, the idea that Democrats have been stuffing ballot boxes, the idea or the questions about this didn't start in 2020, my friends. This goes back, in fact, if you're around my part of the country, there's a big city to our north, a little bit to our west, but primarily to the north of where I am, called Chicago, Illinois. And it is notorious. I remember people making jokes about Chicago, well, maybe not jokes, but at least joking about elections in Chicago that date back to the 60s and so forth. This has been a question that people have for a long time. And you should and you can and should question everybody who's involved in this. But the idea that you can't question anything and that there's no sort of undermining of our confidence in elections when things like this happen is just simply not a fair-minded way of approaching the issue. And that's how many leftists approach the issue today. If they get the result they want, they don't want to know. They don't want to know what actually happened. Don't tell them ignorance is bliss. I got what I wanted. That's all I care about, right? That's the mentality of many people on the left. In fact, I saw we get a lot of response. In fact, if you want to contact me, the best way to do that is to email me or to use our text number, todd@toddhuffshow.com. You can email me directly. I do look at those. If you leave a random Facebook comment, there's a 99% chance I'm not going to see it, especially the volume of comments that we have coming in, especially with the volume of stupid and intentionally vulgar and just hate-filled stuff that I see coming in, which I got to admit is kind of comical to me. But I have been called every name that you could possibly imagine in those messages. But the other way to get a message to me is to text. And by the way, I should tell you, we're in the phase here of relaunching the Inner Circle, the free Inner Circle newsletter. It's been a 2-month break as we've done some things, and you can see we've made some traction on social media. That's one of the things that we've been working on. But if you want to join that Inner Circle newsletter, the best way to do that is to text the word JOIN, JOIN, to 317-785-1030. Again, 317-785-1030. And we'll get you added to receive the free Inner Circle, which we're going to be relaunching here in short order. But, as I look at these comments about election integrity, when I talk about that from time to time, I actually had one that did stick out, one comment. And the comment said this. The comment said, we've been to the moon. I'm paraphrasing. We've been to the moon. We've split the atom. We've done all these great things. What you're saying about elections cannot be true. You're either intentionally trying to cause fear and doubt in people's minds, or you're an idiot or some such thing, which is pretty routine for the things I hear on Facebook when I do take a look at the comments from people on the left. But that's not an argument, my friend. That's an appeal to authority. So when you have, there are logical fallacies, and they're they're committed regularly by people on the radical left. They're committed by everybody at some point. But when you say when you say the reason that I believe our elections are safe and that we shouldn't be worried about mail-in ballots is because we can put a person on the moon, that has nothing, that appeals to the overall power and authority of our federal government. It adds nothing substantively to the discussion at hand. And that's what we have. So I just appeal even to those people who disagree with me, who hate seeing my face here on a Facebook reel or an Instagram reel or whatever. If you just would pause for a moment and ask yourself, is there really any reason it should take 5 days after Election Day for ballots to still be received and counted in Mississippi or wherever, Los Angeles, wherever this stuff is allowed? Is there any reason for that? And can you at least see the possible consequences, negative consequences from that, where people don't believe the results? At least they question the results. They don't understand how results on election night look one way, and then you see ballots coming in just mysteriously over the next few days. And of course, the ballots that come in are not just a little bit different than the ballots that were cast prior to, well, on Election Day or prior to that. These ballots sometimes are perfectly aligned with what people need to see happen on the left for them to be victorious. That's exactly what happened in California. I'm amazed still, the number of people on the left who understand what happened in Los Angeles on this mayor's race. They don't understand it. They keep, again, commenting that, why would you think a Republican's going to win in Los Angeles? Well, first of all, that mayor's race was not about who won. That mayor's race was about who finished in second, because they were going to take the top two candidates, if no one achieved 50% of the total vote, and put them in a runoff election in November. And Spencer Pratt was well ahead of his leftist opponent, not Karen Bass, but he was ahead of the other leftist opponent and on election night. And then within a few days or weeks, he fell behind and was in third. And we're just supposed to believe this. We're supposed to believe that Karen Bass, the majority of Democrats who cast ballots prior to Election Day, voted for Karen Bass. The number of Democrats who voted by mail overwhelmingly voted for the other Democrat, who they needed to those votes to go to so that Spencer Pratt wouldn't finish in second. Can you at least understand the questions? Why is trust the process, bro, the way that we look at this situation? That's not good enough for me. I don't know why that's good enough for you. I do actually know why it's good enough for you, because if your side wins, then you're cool with the results. And that says a whole lot about you, my friends. Not you, the listener. I'm talking to the left that may be tuned in here, or to the left in the Facebook crowd who wants to have these comments about how stupid us Republicans are for just having questions about this and wanting these things to be tightened up. So we're talking here about the case that the Supreme Court cited. They ruled that these mail-in ballots could trickle in for up to 5 days after the Election Day. So the court took the case for its October 2025 term. Oral argument took place on March 23rd of this year, just a couple of months ago. And of course, it was a 5-4 vote. It was decided yesterday. The justices sided with the state of Mississippi, allowing mail-in ballots to be received, to be counted, as long as they're postmarked by and received within 5 days of Election Day. So as long as the postmark was Election Day and they got it within 5 days of Election Day taking place, they're allowed to count the ballots. Now, this, of course, was an overruling of the Fifth Circuit Court's decision. It reinstated the lower court's decision that was in favor of the state of Mississippi. So this case affects how the small share of mail ballots that are received after Election Day by mail are handled. And Mississippi is one of 15 states, including the District of Columbia, so 14 states plus D.C., that allows this grace period. Now, You'll hear me say this because, again, people misrepresent it. This is what the law is, the laws that are written. The court has ruled on this. This is the law of the land. I think it makes no sense, and I think it's stupid. So those aren't the same thing. I'm not questioning whether this can be done. I'm questioning whether it should be done, and I'm questioning maybe more fundamentally why it's being done. It makes no sense to me. Used to you cast your vote on election day, and people found a way to do that. Then we had early voting, then we had mail-in voting, which of course mass mail-in voting, and then we had mail-in voting that you could just send basically whenever you felt like it. Listen, if you aren't prepared, if you don't know that there's an election coming up, you shouldn't be able to grab your ballot on election day, get it to the post office, have it postmarked and received by within a week, basically 5 days, and then suddenly your vote should just be counted. I mean, if you before mail-in ballots were a thing, before that was a thing, other than absentee ballots, which you can do here in my state, but before that was a thing, you actually had to get to the polls. If you didn't get there by 6 p.m. here in my state to get into line, you lost your chance to vote. And that was just when there was an election day. And now there's early voting. There's multiple places most people can vote now. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, and it undermines confidence in elections, my friends. Let's face it, living with discomfort is tough, and while prescription medications can help, they often come with a long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency. That's why more people are exploring natural options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. This is a family-run company. They do things the right way. They work directly with Indonesian farmers, and they lab test every batch that they receive. No synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just honest, natural Kratom that's been used for generations. Real Kratom is properly handed. It's natural. The problems come from the synthetic garbage, the contaminated junk that you'll find other sellers providing. Christopher's does not do that. They keep it clean, they keep it real, and they keep you informed. You can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Coupon code Todd Huff saves you 10% on your first purchase. Christopher's Organic Botanicals.com. That's Christopher's Organic Botanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, my friends, time out for me. You're listening to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I want to go through just a few more details with the Supreme Court ruling, and I want to play for you Trump's response yesterday in the White House's Oval Office. We're talking here about the Supreme Court ruling in Watson versus the RNC, which the court basically said that Mississippi's law that allowed votes to trickle in after Election Day, so long as they were postmarked by Election Day and received within 5 days of Election Day, those votes could be counted. It was legitimate. Now, the ruling is 5-4, and I'm going to give you the majority. Of course, you'll know that the three liberal justices are always going to be, you know immediately what those three liberal justices, leftist justices, where they sided. That's Sonia Sotomayor, that's Elena Kagan, and that is Ketanji Brown Jackson. The other two that sided with the court's extreme left-wing lunatics include Chief Justice John Roberts, who is, as I've shared before, the most unreliable of the so-called conservative court majority. How about those who actually just interpret the law and the Constitution? He's the most unreliable. He can emotionalize these things, and he can put a lot of emphasis on what the court's decision might create in the electorate or in our nation. And really, that's the job of Congress. So John Roberts, sure he's a nice guy, whatever, but the most unreliable of the so-called conservative wing of the court. But he's not in the conservative wing. And by the way, to be clear, I don't use that term. I think some people mean people that side with Republicans. These are, when I talk about the conservative justices, I talk about those who actually read and interpret the law as originally intended. These are originalists. And I don't put John Roberts in that court. He sometimes sides with the conservative majority. He sometimes sides with the leftist judicial activists on the court, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. But then we have Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who joined. She actually wrote the majority opinion. And again, listen, we have 3 justices that are relatively new to the court: Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh. I've shared with you that Gorsuch is the one that shows the most promise to me. He typically finds himself aligned, not always, but in many cases, he finds himself aligned with Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. These are the 2 most reliable originalists, people who actually read and interpret the Constitution and statute. These are brilliant legal minds. Gorsuch usually finds himself with them. Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett are in the middle. They're not as far to the Chief Justice Roberts side, but Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett are somewhere in the middle. Coney Barrett sided with the leftist, the activist judges, and she wrote the majority opinion. Kavanaugh sided with Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. So if you look at the majority opinion, and I just want to go through this quickly. I want to get a few things else covered here during the program. But if you look at Amy Coney Barrett's majority opinion, there's a few points that she made. Number 1, the defining element of an election has always been the electorate's choice of a candidate, is basically a summary of what she's written. You can find this on SCOTUS blog. And that the choice is made when voting is complete, not when ballots are received. So in other words, this does not extend Election Day. Congress has the right to set Election Day. Ballots must be received or cast by Election Day. So she says, listen, just because they don't have it doesn't mean that the ballot hasn't been cast. So the choice that's made when voting is done, when that ballot is filled out, that's what makes it complete, she says, not when the ballots are received. I wonder, though, is there any limit to that? Could we get ballots for the election received 5 years later? Now, you would say, of course, Todd, we can't do that, but I would say, why? You illustrate it with an absurdity and then understand, well, we clearly can't do that. So understand the reason we can't do it. And once we understand the reason we can't do it, we then have to say, are we doing that very thing by extending it by 1 day? So this means that the deadline that matters under federal law is the deadline for individuals to vote, which the majority opinion says was satisfied since voting itself must be complete by Election Day. She says it is because the ballots have to be postmarked. And that's in a nutshell what this comes down to. Now, I want to, just for the sake of expediency and getting to other things here, the dissenting opinion was written by Samuel Alito. Alito said that the dispute hinged on when the election occurs. He's right, by the way. He says that mail and early voting are lawful. Those things are undisputed. But he said under federal law, the electorate's choice, their collective choice, must still be authoritatively expressed on Election Day. And that, he says, can only be met when the critical act of completing the collection of ballots on Election Day itself, just as when all voting was done in person, when that occurs. He's exactly right on this. The court got this wrong, by the way. Alito argued that accepting late arriving ballots, quote, effectively postpones the date on which the electorate's choice is made, and federal law precludes that postponement. He accused the majority of the court having a flawed misunderstanding of the Election Day statutes. He also pointed out, and this really goes to the core of the biggest part of the problem, but He says that this ruling, quote, creates a serious risk of further undermining public confidence in our elections and our system of self-governance. He said that there will be lamentable consequences, saying counting post-election day, I should say, ballots is, quote, blatantly contrary to federal law and would further undermine the Americans' faith in the integrity of this country's elections. That is exactly what is going on. Now, Kavanaugh joined that dissenting opinion in parts, not in total. I don't want to go through all of that, but the bottom line here is that that is how the court ruled. And so now these states can extend, basically, past Election Day, the ability to count ballots. So now you've got Trump in the White House talking with the media here. And this, of course, Trump has the answer for how to fix this problem, because it still makes no sense. It still makes no sense that we are counting ballots after Election Day. It undermines our confidence in the system. It looks shady a lot of times. Listen, it may not always be. It certainly opens up the opportunity for there to be things that are questionable. We've seen it happen, especially when the rules for especially mass mail-in, vote by mail ballots are out there across the state. There's a lot of ballots. There's less certainty that the person who filled that ballot out was a person than a person who comes in and votes in person, hands in their photo ID. I mean, these are common sense things. We've been through this. At some point, you have to ask yourself, why would someone be against these common sense rules? And unfortunately, I think we have our answer. The ends have justified the means for these folks. If they have elections that turn out in their favor, if they see these hockey stick graphs on election night like we saw in 2020 with Biden's magical overnight vote dump, similar thing happened in Los Angeles. They're cool with it if it helps their candidate. Like I said with the issue of illegal immigration, my friends, I said the left is totally fine with illegal immigration because it still gives them an advantage politically. Because the people coming across the border, when you look at the demographic data, they said these are people that typically vote for and support Democrats. So they're cool with it. But let that data flip. And by the way, it is flipping amongst Hispanic voters. Let that data flip, and you'll immediately find the left is much more concerned about things like illegal immigration than they were previously. Because again, the ends justifies the means. I've got to take a break here, my friends. We're getting in near the end of this second segment, folks. Let's face it, every single dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of America we want to live in. That's why we launched Freedom Marketplace. It's a free directory of businesses that align with your conservative values. These businesses have made a promise. That promise is no support for leftist candidates, leftist causes. And if they break that promise, my friends, they are booted to the sidelines. That's never happened, by the way, but that is what would happen. So if you're tired of funding the woke agenda, and yes, it exists, and yes, it's a real thing, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, you can visit freedommarketplace.net. Freedommarketplace.net, it's free, it's easy, and if I can say so myself, my friends, it is the right thing to do. Liberty and business for all. Time out for me here behind the microphone. You're listening here to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third final segment of today's program. Think about this. Our investments are like seeds. We plant, they grow, they multiply, but are they bearing the kind of fruit that we want? At 4-8 Financial, they believe your money should reflect your values. They specialize in wealth management and biblically responsible investing, screening out companies that do not align with your faith. It's all part of their purpose-centered financial planning, helping you live a life of meaning and purpose. If you want to see how your investments align with your values, visit 48financial.com/Todd. You You can take a quick and easy assessment, and they will tell you to what degree your investments are aligned with your values. 48financial.com/Todd. 48financial, they're here to worry about your money so that you don't have to. All right, so I want to play President Trump's response, and I would like to at least get to the other thing that I mentioned off the top. I don't know if I'll have time, but here's Trump talking, in front of the media, being asked about the Supreme Court's ruling in this particular case. And Trump, as Trump does so well, makes it clear what the next logical step is for the Republican Party to fix this problem with our system of elections.
Mr. President, what do you make of the Supreme Court ruling today in regards to the mail-in ballots, and what comes next for the SAVE Act after today's ruling?
Well, because of the mail-in ballot ruling, which was a little bit surprising, gives people more time to vote illegally, let's say. But the SAVE Act is even more important, and that's the right. You have to be a citizen of our country. Okay, you have to show you're a citizen of our country, called citizenship. Voter ID by photo voter ID, and no mail-in ballots unless you're in the military, disabled, you're ill, or you're away, or even on a vacation. We're being very open about it. It's pretty easy. And we'll have honest elections. But the ruling, which a lot of people were waiting for, that was a ruling that was, I think it was very detrimental to honest elections. But it is what it is. Basically, they're keeping it a little bit the way it is now. They may have a little bit of a restriction on based on the wording.
About firing the parliamentarian.
And then you have the...
I don't want to get into the parliamentarian thing. That's another issue I don't have time for today. But I will say this. That President Trump basically says, listen, the Supreme Court has ruled. It is what it is. But we have a way to fix this. And it's actually even better if we pass this legislation. Yes, it addresses some of the things that were the result of the Supreme Court ruling, but we can effectively overrule their ruling by creating a new law, and that would eliminate these mail-in ballots being counted days after Election Day. But the SAVE Act's even better than that. We've got to make sure that people can prove who they are prior to registering to vote in our elections, which is surprisingly not necessary in a lot of places. It's boggling to the mind. If you really want... I can't even believe we're having these discussions. If you really want secure elections where people who vote in those elections are only people who are supposed to vote in those elections, it's pretty obvious what needs to happen, right? You've got to make sure that people can prove and demonstrate who they are, have them come in person, have a photo ID. This Save America Act does that as well. It also eliminates mass mail-in ballots. This is probably, they're all sticking points for the left because listen, I suspect that these things have been manipulated, that these things have been used to their electoral advantage. There's nothing wrong, especially when maybe all states have early voting, I don't know. But when you have voting that you can do in person over the course of time, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to go and do that. I know here in my state, it's open for several weeks. Several weeks you can go and cast your ballot. It's often not even busy because it's open for such a long period of time. This is a very reasonable thing. It would make our elections secure. And it would also overrule the silliness that we just saw the Supreme Court decide on yesterday in the Watson case. So that's all I want to say about that. I want to say more, but I just got to wrap up here. I do want to share the deputy mayor of Paris. She goes on to Instagram, onto social media. This was a few days ago, 3 days ago, it says. And she posts this, right? So there's a lot of, there's a heat wave. This happens in Europe on a regular basis, a very serious heat wave. And people actually are dying from the heat wave. In fact, do you know, I did a little bit of research here, and I've got to get to this quickly, but when you compare the number of people that die in heat waves in Europe. It's a greater number than the people who die by guns here. It's something in the neighborhood. I don't have the numbers. It was between 11 and 12 over the past few years. Between 11 and 12 people per 100,000 die of heat-related deaths in Europe. And when you remove suicides from American gun deaths, it's something like 4.5 deaths per 100,000 people. But she says, I say that because she says this: "Dear American journalists and social media influencers, for days some of you have been criticizing and making fun of Paris because the city doesn't have AC in every room of every apartment and the places. This is so rich." But she goes on to blame America. We're the ones that are causing people in Paris to suffer because we have, I guess, too much air conditioning and we're not governed by the global warming lunatics. But I've got to go. Out of time. SDG.